how much protein do we need? Does it matter when we have it? So I think we see protein is sort of up there on a pedestal when it comes to training and recovery, but how much of it do we really need? Hi, and welcome to another episode of Ask Lattice. Today I've got Mina with me on the sofa.
Hi.
Mina is a nutritionist here at Lattice, and today we're going to be answering some questions from the Women's Lattice Training Community Facebook page. So the general theme for today is around fueling for sessions and protein intake. So Mina's just the person to have with me here. So to get us started, the first question was how best to fuel around the mid-session slump. So I think we all know that feeling when energy is sort of being definitely on the down, and can we sort of revive that in any way?
Yeah. And I think with this question, there's lots of different angles that you could take this from. And there's, with most things in nutrition, there's very much a it depends factor. So how long is your session? How intense is your session? You know, have you been bouldering for 5 hours and maybe actually it's just time to finish your session?
We've all been there.
And no amount of, carbohydrate top up or whatever is necessarily going to help if you're just really fatigued. But if we're talking about shorter duration, so maybe you've got a 3-hour session and you need a little top up halfway through the session, I'd say that's a good idea for most people. If your session is more than about 90 minutes and of reasonable intensity, it's worth having a snack, something that contains 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate. So you could be looking at a banana or a flapjack or something that you like the taste of, that you're going to enjoy, that's mainly carbohydrate based, to take you through the rest of that session, just top up your energy stores.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess something that we get asked a lot is a little bit like, are sweets okay? A jelly baby's okay? And obviously you could go for a flapjack or a banana, but in this sort of scenario, when you're just looking for that sort of quick release of energy, a sweet sort of treat or sweets is not the end of the world here, is it?
Yeah, so long as you're getting really nutritious food in other parts of your day. These foods, I think we're often led to believe that certain foods are good and bad. And again, it always depends. And it depends on the context of your whole nutritional intake and of what you need in that moment. So if you need, if essentially all carbohydrates are broken down into glucose and used by our body to create energy. So if in that moment you just need a quick hit, sometimes something more kind of sweet or like that would work better. And it's also worth thinking about what you've eaten earlier in the day. So of course, you're more likely to have a slump in the middle of your session if you haven't fueled well up until that point during the day. So it's making sure that you get those kind of solid meals in beforehand.
Yeah, so I guess the main takeaways there is that really when it comes to exercise and training, climbing is a high intensity exercise. So really, for the most part, sort of glucose and glycogen stores are where we're sort of getting our energy from to keep all our muscles working. So if you're wanting to fuel your mid-session and you're looking to sort of push on, then it probably needs to be sort of sugar, carbohydrate based, and sort of whatever you enjoy the taste of. But just going back to the point that Mina mentioned at the start, which I think is really important, is to actually think about your session length. If you've gone 2 hours in and actually you're feeling really tired, then can you stop training there? Would that actually be the most optimal way forward? Stop training, have your sort of post-training meal, and maybe just rearrange some of your sessions to another day. That's actually always an option to maintain the quality there. So moving on, question 2. How much protein do we need? Does it matter when we have it? So I think we see protein is sort of up there on a pedestal when it comes to training and recovery, but how much of it do we really need?
Yeah, so again, this is going to sound really odd, but it depends. So the kind of recommended daily intake for protein is about 0.8 grams per kilogram. But that's really considered to be quite low. That's like the level that you need to not be in ill health from low protein. So really we're looking at, for most of the general population, you're wanting to be around 1 gram per kilogram body weight or above. Now then, when we look at an athletic population, we want that to be even higher, because we're stressing our bodies and our muscles, and we want them to adapt and to grow, and we want to maintain muscle mass, we want to develop muscle mass, especially in a sport like climbing, where being strong and having that kind of muscle mass and lean mass is really important. So really, for most climbers, I'd be aiming for the kind of 1.5 grams per kilogram or above, depending on their discipline. So if you're purely an endurance sport climber, I'd maybe be around the 1.5, 1.6. If you're a boulderer, maybe around 1.8. And again, then there's room to go a little bit higher as well. If, you see bodybuilders and much kind of more strength, power focused athletes on much higher than that, 2.2 grams per kilogram. I'd probably rarely take climbers that high unless, it depends if they were going into a deficit phase or something like that. There's a few other kind of caveats as to where you might take someone a bit higher. But that would be the general range for climbers.
Yeah, so most of us probably fall in that sort of 1.5 to 1.8-ish region for sort of grams per kilogram of body weight. And so that's like for the whole day, isn't it? What about around training sessions and the timing of protein? I feel like we get asked this a lot, and I think you've started off from a really good point there for like the daily intake, because that really forms the foundation of our nutritional intake. And I guess from my perspective, I don't think that having 20 grams post-training is really going to sort of make up for the fact that that's the only protein that you're having in the day. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that, on when you have it and that sort of timing window that's often chatted about?
Sure. So, essentially, because of the way that muscle protein synthesis works, we have this kind of optimal time frame for muscle protein synthesis, and then we have a refractory period where we call it the muscle full effect, where essentially you can't optimally stimulate muscle protein synthesis anymore. So really, in practical terms, what you want to be doing is spreading out that intake into, say, 4 or 5 portions throughout the day. And for most people, you're looking at 20 to 25, possibly 30 grams of protein at each one of those kind of protein feedings, if you like. But what I wouldn't want to see is someone having that overall protein intake and having, barely anything through the day and then loads in the evening. That's kind of a waste, if you like. So you really want to kind of pulse dose it through the day to optimize the way that your muscles will respond.
And I think that's a really good point, because I know that there's a lot out there about sort of protein timing and the sort of metabolic window post-training for recovery. And that used to be more around the up to 2 hour mark after training. And it has expanded quite a lot based on studies done to up to a 24-hour window. But if you want to optimize on like sort of breaking your protein throughout the day, really you want to probably have some in the 2 hour window anyway. So even if you could wait a bit longer, having it in that 2 hour window is probably just going to be good to make sure that you could have enough time throughout the day to get your full daily requirement of protein. And I guess along those lines, when it comes to females, it's often talked about that we have a smaller metabolic window, like maybe actually we return to a sort of resting state at a slightly quicker level. So potentially that's a bit more important for us. But I think you put it really nicely that thinking about the sort of your whole intake first before sort of worrying about your timing is probably the best way forward. Do you have much, I know that you chatted about the that sort of around 20 gram intake and that sort of saturation of protein. I know that leucine is one of those sort of switch on amino acids. So does it depend where we get our protein source from? Is that important?
Yeah, sure. So as Maddy said, like leucine is one of the essential amino acids, and it's essentially it's an extra special one because it's like a signaling amino acid. So you need to have a certain amount of leucine. It's kind of 2 to 2.5 grams to kind of signal to your muscles to get that optimal spike in muscle protein synthesis. So really, and that's where the kind of choice of the food choices comes into it and the protein quality comes into it. And we often hear people talking about complete and incomplete proteins. And essentially, we've got a group of proteins that will be considered complete. And when I say complete, I mean that they have high enough levels of all the essential amino acids. And by essential, I mean the ones that our bodies can't create. So what we want is to be getting high enough levels of all those essential amino acids. And incomplete proteins, which are normally plant based proteins. Incomplete sounds like they're really lacking, and they do have all the amino acids, all the essential ones, just not quite in high enough amounts. And they'll generally be lacking in 1 or 2 depending on the plant source, which means that you can combine plant sources. So, for example, grains and legumes combined together, you have a complete protein source. So if you're vegetarian or vegan, it's totally doable. It just takes a little bit more thought and a little bit more variety of protein choices.
Yeah, that's great. So what's your favourite then?
What's my favourite? I really like eggs.
Oh, that's such a boring favourite.
I know, it was like the first thing I thought of because I had eggs earlier. So it was just the first thing I thought of. What's my favourite protein other than that? I don't know. What's yours?
I quite like hummus and oatcakes. I think that's good because I like that the carbs like get a bit of sort of glycogen replenishment as well. So moving on from sort of protein, but related as well, is the next question. What changes to nutrition, if any, are suggested around the perimenopause?
Sure. So around the perimenopause, essentially what we're looking at is as we get older as athletes, we can develop, and this actually goes across sexes, a bit more what we call anabolic resistance, which is essentially that our muscle cells are less responsive to amino acids. And all that means is that we need more protein to get the same response in terms of muscle protein synthesis as your kind of 22-year-old counterpart might need. So it's just about upping those doses. We talked about those dose pulses throughout the day. So rather than 20 grams, you might be, again, depending on your anthropometrics, you might be looking at a 30, 35 gram protein dose. So that, we're talking about quite high protein intake here. But that would be something I would definitely recommend.
Yeah, and I think because around the sort of perimenopause phase, we've chatted quite a lot about the emphasis on strength and maybe building muscle that would be really useful to focus on around this stage to keep supporting your climbing, as you get older. And so protein is really useful after the sort of sessions that you'll be doing, especially if you are doing more resistance training and kind of building that into your plan. Okay, so on to our fourth and final question for this episode. What are the most important things to consider when new to training and nutrition? And what about after a long break away? And I think we had a couple of comments from climbers about sort of breaks for pregnancy or career. So maybe you're starting afresh. What do you think are the most important things you would consider in nutrition?
Sure. So, the pillars of nutrition are first and foremost eating enough. So really thinking about fueling for the work required. So thinking about what your training load is like, what your climbing load is like, and also your whole allostatic load. So work stresses, work activity levels, whether you've got any childcare things going on, commutes, if you commute on a bike, all those kinds of things. So it's really looking at your overall energy needs and making sure that you're eating enough to support those energy expenditures. That would be kind of my number one pillar. And then, after that, you can look at making sure that you've got enough carbohydrate around your training sessions to optimize training quality and then getting those protein doses in. And other than that, the main things are going to be having a really varied whole food diet where you can. So getting lots of different colours on your plate.
Yeah, I think that is going for these sorts of pillars of either nutrition or training are a really good way to sort of approach training if it's new to you or coming back after a long break. Because I think it can be overwhelming, can't it, trying to think about everything at once. And I think you just want to choose and build up from a really good foundation. And so from a training point of view, I'm definitely with you. If you've just started training, then likely your energy expenditure might have gone up a little bit. So you might want to just eat a little bit more. Maybe no need to look at any numbers, but just try eating a little bit more around your exercise. And also from the sort of training side of things, it's choosing what to train and what will be most beneficial to you. So that might just be something that's more specific to the climbing around your area, or maybe a certain weakness that you're sort of wanting to address. And then just to build up whatever load you use in the sessions you choose really gradually, making sure that you plan a rest or a sort of deloaded week, maybe at least once every sort of in a 4-week block. And I think that's the main mistakes I see people making, is that they go in really hard and they just suddenly want to train everything, and then they maybe end up injured, so building up gradually, and they enjoy their training, so they just keep at it week after week without scheduling in a deload.
We've all been there.
We've all been there. End up really tired. So that's everything for today. And so if you enjoyed this episode, then click to like and subscribe, and we'll also contain a link to our Women's Lattice Facebook community group. So if you want to get involved there, then all you have to do is ask permission to join.